Hi, my name is Sam Sudy. I'm an ADU designer for Propel Studio Architecture, and I'll be serving as your moderator for this session titled Design Matters, How Small Design Leads to Large Outcomes. So I think it's safe to say that design plays a significant role in the creation and development of ADUs. In this session, we'll be discussing practical and theoretical approaches for the unique design challenge of doing more with less. Because this is formatted as a roundtable discussion, we'll be hearing from multiple perspectives from leading ADU designers on how thoughtful small space design can propel the whole market forward. And with that, let me introduce the designers. So first we have Lindsay Shack. Lindsay is the co-founder and principal at Love Shack Architecture, a remote studio serving Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Lindsay's expertise in architectural technology, psychology, and ecology combine to create valuable and meaningful results for clients. Her projects include small dwellings built from natural materials to achieve maximum comfort from high-performance assemblies. And Lindsay also instructs at the School of Architecture at Montana State University and has delivered workshops and lectures on sustainable architecture at the Universidad Latina in Costa Rica. Next is Nicholas Papaefthimiou. He's a licensed architect with over 15 years of professional experience in firms across the US and in Europe. In 2014, he founded infillPDX, a design and research collaborative focused on the development of sustainable infill housing models to address Portland's housing crisis. He holds master's degrees in both architecture and engineering from UC Berkeley and Bachelor of Science degrees in architecture and urban planning from MIT. He teaches courses at PSU and the University of Oregon in housing design, building science research methods, and structural theory. Third is another designer. His name is Lucas Gray. He also works for Propel Studio. He founded Propel Studio in 2013 after working at firms overseas and in Portland. In the past few years, Propel Studio has designed over 30 ADUs that blend both function, beauty, and sustainability. Lucas enjoys working closely with clients to develop custom designs that meet specific needs and unique site conditions. He has a Bachelor of Architecture from McGill University, Master of Architecture degree from the University of Oregon, and is LEED accredited. He has served as an adjunct professor at PSU and a guest design critic at the University of Oregon. And last but not least, Skylar Smith. Skylar is a licensed architect in Oregon and Washington with a Bachelor's of Architecture from the Rhode Island School of Design. In 2013, he co-founded Polyphon Architecture and Design, which specializes in residential architecture with a focus on ADUs and missing middle housing. He also grew up in the Pacific Northwest and loves spending time with his family, biking around Portland, and spending time outdoors. A true Portlander. So like I mentioned previously, this is going to be a roundtable discussion in which I'll be posing questions to the panel, and in turn, any or all of them are allowed to answer. So if you have questions you'd like to direct to the panel, there will be time at the end, so please hold your questions until the end. And with that, let's get started. You guys ready? Ready. Okay, awesome. So let's start with sort of a broad question. In your experience or opinion, what is the biggest contribution that design plays in the ADU market?
I'll take that.
Thanks, Gary.
I think that one thing about ADUs, in our experience at least, the sites are so tight, and ADU code, I mean, it's been liberalized more recently, but you're always pushing against kind of all constraints like zoning and building code, and so kind of just like maximizing what you can do on any given site is, I mean, it's a very dry kind of take on it, but I think just from a core thing, because I think, it doesn't take an architect to necessarily design an ADU, but it takes someone that's really well versed in the zoning and the building code to really make the most of what you can do on any site. I don't know. You guys?
I would say that one of the biggest challenges that we face as designers is coming up. Well, here in Portland, we have a very restrictive zoning code that dictates a lot of style. So I would say our biggest challenge that we're overcoming for each project is how do we get a design that meets our clients' expectations and aesthetic values within the restraints that we're working in based on Portland's regulations.
Yeah, I would just underscore. I shouldn't use that. It'll hurt people.
No, you should, because the
Should I?
people in the back need to hear too.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. I would really underscore what we've already heard, that when we hear about design and design matters and what is design, it is not just an aesthetic thing. And I think working with homeowners, we've heard a lot today that a lot of them are amateur developers and first-time real estate entrepreneurs. I think the public has a skewed version of how much designing time architects do in the course of putting together a project. So I think it's great that we're already talking about design in terms of code and maximizing the opportunities for the project. And I think part of design is also the relationship that you have with your client. So introducing them to what architects really do and how much a project really takes to get done. That to me is sort of one of the biggest challenges and opportunities.
Thanks. I think that design has a tremendous impact when it comes to the ADU market, and it really comes down to design equity and providing options for people that live at different levels of the community and different stratas of our communities. And the ability for design to have a positive influence on what that outcome is pretty tremendous. And essentially it comes down to a really important question about how do we choose to live? And how being able to answer that question with options that are available to you, options that meet your own constraints, options that meet your own property constraints, those of your family, those are the ones you're trying to aspire to. Those are all part of the kit of parts that architects use to try and come up with the appropriate solution. So the power of design actually is not just the outcome, but it's even being able to provide the number of options a potential client might have for their housing situation, whatever that might be. For some people, it might be the more typical single-family home, but ADUs provide an opportunity for living and quality of life that needs a designer's intent to really see that through successfully to the end. So I really think the impact of strong design in a small space is even greater than something that has a much larger budget or a much larger scale.
Great. So sort of to go along with that, a lot of times clients will come to us as designers with all these wants and needs and the big dreams. And sometimes we can provide all those to them, oftentimes we can't. Oftentimes we have to pick and choose and help our clients decide what are the needs and what are the wants and distinguishing between the two of them. So I'd like to know from the panel, what are some ways you've used design to accomplish client goals that were otherwise unimaginable without good, efficient design?
I'll take that one. We've, through a process of building a small space, typically clients that come to me and have already decided that they want to live in a smaller space, whether that be an actual tiny home or just a more condensed home, they typically have already made the choice of downsizing their life and having more of a minimalist lifestyle. And one of the education pieces when we bring clients through this process is helping them understand what the new home will support in their lifestyle and what it won't, and what those realities are. And we often ask people to kind of try it on for size for a little bit if they're new to the idea. Our typical American suburban home has so many more artifacts and items in it that will fit in a tiny home. You can't have both in a small home, in an ADU. You can't have both a desire for lots of possessions and the absence of clutter. So if you have, those two things don't work well in the same space. So sometimes with clients, when they have this romanticized vision of living this minimalist lifestyle, we often try to present those questions to them early and make sure that they're prepared for the kind of life that they will live. And the best part of that conversation is once they start to walk down the path of reducing their impact and reducing the amount of possessions that they have to take care of and put away in different places and so forth, they've realized that they don't need their stuff as much as they thought they did. And it's an outcome of design that I think that it's a result of the process that is really, that's not so much up in front, people aren't expecting it, and they happily realize that they've discovered something about what they want in their lifestyle that wasn't part of the process initially, that the design process brought that out. We have to figure out how many cups, how many plates, how many pieces of art, right?
Do your clients sometimes feel judged when you ask them that? Those questions? I always feel like it's a very sensitive thing. I mean, it's kind of like, budget is a big thing, and then just lifestyle, which is, people have this idealized, way of kind of this Pinterest-ready kind of life that they imagine themselves, but a lot of the times it does come down to lifestyle. I mean, I certainly don't have an answer, but I just wonder how, if you find that to be an easy conversation, or if that's like,
It's never a conversation that's held all at once. It's held
Yeah.
in increments and pieces until we get to the outcome that they want. But I think that it's a great question, and I think that the clients are usually looking for a smaller space. We have a lot of clients that have already had the big house, and now they're coming back. They're downsizing, or they're decided to live in a more minimalist way, and that goes for clients that are later on in life, as well as ones that are just starting out and they've been through that experience. And so they're usually ready for the judgment, or they're ready for the sort of the come to Jesus conversation of like, are you sure this is what you want? Are you ready for this? Is an ADU lifestyle really for you? And typically they get over the hump of that conversation pretty quickly when what they ultimately want is a more simplistic way to live in terms of their system of home.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've probably talked myself out of about 10 or 20% of my clients. You have that initial conversation, you say, what are you really looking for here? And sometimes your job as a designer is to hear the commentary behind what they say they want, or poke at what they think they need. And I've had clients who come to me and say, I need an ADU. And I meet with them and I'm like, no, you really need to remodel that bedroom upstairs. That would help a lot. Or, I really want a detached ADU. And I say, well, you've got a great basement. Let's look at that. And especially now with these infill standards coming along, I'm advising a lot of clients about how to optimize what they have to also maximize the potential of what opportunities might be coming. So, yeah, I think the conversation with the clients, it's really about understanding their needs, and it's about listening. Kind of steered it in slightly different direction, but did you have anything on that?
I mean, I think everyone here kind of explained how we approach design as well. Just to put some names to these things, we're just calling this phase of the project programming, where we're having that conversation with what are the spaces you need, what is the lifestyle choices you're going to make, either changes, or if it's an elderly couple who are planning for the future, what are you going to need going forward? But really, it doesn't happen all at once, but we usually start the design process with that conversation, and then come back to it as we're actually getting pen to paper and laying out floor plans and everything.
So it sounds like you guys already answered my next question, which is the process for starting to design ADUs, figuring out what the client needs. And oftentimes, if a client is looking to move into the ADU themselves, it's a come to Jesus talk about whether or not they're ready for that type of lifestyle. But how does that conversation change when you're talking to a client who wants to build an ADU, say for the potential of short-term rentals or long-term rentals? How is that conversation different, and what type of values do you think change with those two scenarios?
I'm always surprised how much clients care about the look and feel of an ADU that they're never going to live in.
Never say never.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
They have to look at it, but the layout and they try to, I find that they're often getting really detailed and caring so much about the kitchen layout and all this stuff, rather than trusting the designers they hired to do that for a space that they probably aren't going to be living in.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people, it seems like in our experience, they're doing, for a lot of people, and building an ADU is their only opportunity ever to work with an architect or to build something new, and so it's like a mini dream home in a way, and it's kind of, I think that's the very elemental thing for people, is to design and build a home. So it always seems like more so than other projects, ADU clients want to be hands-on to a great extent.
And Skylar, maybe a follow-up question to that. How do you suppose designing an ADU is different from designing a dream home? How is it different in your experience? Is it different?
The budget is a lot lower.
From the design standpoint.
From a design standpoint, with ADUs, there are just so many constraints that a lot of the times it's, half of the thing is it's just navigating, trying to get all of the desires and programs into a project and making it just work at all from a space and budget standpoint. But I think within that, there's also a lot more opportunities for people are more willing to, look at creative solutions and things, materials-wise, and where someone's building a, quote-unquote dream home, there's very, I think they're looking more towards specific materials and things and features versus, you know, with an ADU, people are willing to go to be more creative, I think.
I would just add that I love this question about the design process, because I think that I know that in our commercial and institutional work in my company, when we're hired by a board of people, they always treat the architects like the experts in the room. When I'm dealing with a private residential client and what we're trying to do is figure out how this space works best for their life, I'm not the expert in the room anymore. They are paying me for my expertise, but there's a lot of listening that we have to do, right, to make sure we get it right. And I think the difference between a large-scale dream house and this ADU is that sometimes the ADU can actually become quite precious and quite important in all of the little details. There's only so much countertop. There's only so much window trim. There's only so many places to place a few books. So those details can become quite precious and sometimes quite fussy, right? And all the constraints in trying to work it out. But the process then becomes really, really important, and it sometimes is overlooked in small spaces that bringing a designer to the table to help you sort those things out can really get you to a better outcome.
Yeah.
As opposed to struggling with it and struggling with it. This is, I mean, I think that it's, I think the term is sort of deceptively simple, right? Where it looks like it's easy because it's, hey, my dog has a doghouse. This is a small house. I should be able to do this. I'm a smart person. People that hire architects are typically effective, accomplished, successful people, and they're good at what they do. And there's a process for them to give you enough trust to let them come into your home and let them design things for you. And there's parts of that I think homeowners should take ownership of, and then parts of it that I would really like them to let us allow us to give our expertise on, and then we'll try and figure out what the best outcome is. But that's something that's different between the large project and the small.
So I think a lot of that stress between the client and the architect, and learning to become a good team, because in the end, if the client and the architect can't come together to become a good team, the project really falls through. So a lot of times, at least in my experience, I found that the biggest stressor is money and budget, and making sure that we don't sacrifice good design for budget. And so my question to you guys is, why is good design valuable, and why is it valuable not just to make the cheapest thing possible, and how as designers, how can we accomplish that, or how can we accomplish that in at least small ways in an ADU project?
Well, I'll just jump in because I think that in generally speaking, that the best way for us to have impact is, oh my gosh, I'm going to say word salad, and I'm not going to stop now. So I'm going to let somebody else talk. The thought just went out of my mind. So I'm going to think about it a little bit. Sorry about that, guys.
I guess I think a lot of the things that we are good at, and just having done a lot of projects and just being spatial and visually oriented people is, you know, a lot of the things that we provide are not really things that cost anything, like efficient layout and flow and composition and proportion. I mean, you can see, you know, like agricultural buildings and things. There's a lot of projects that are very kind of industrial or utilitarian projects that are can be really beautiful, and a lot of it has to do with just the connection between utility and the design that comes out of that, versus, you know, a lot of the times when people are designing homes, it's more about people's idea of what a home should be like versus the utility. And I think that there's it's not necessarily about cheapness, I guess. It's more just about that, I mean, I think that hopefully as architects we can do things with very small budgets, and it's more just about composition and balance and things. It doesn't necessarily have to be about expensive finishes and high-end appliances and things.
Yeah, I was just going to say we should be careful to reject this idea that a high budget and good design need to go together. And I talk to my clients about food. There's really good expensive food, but I think we all have some favorite food that is not that expensive. Maybe it just comes out of our garden, right? So one thing, I do have part of the business where we work with clients and develop ADUs, but we also have a whole maybe the core of the business is developing ADUs as affordable housing, set by the Portland Housing Bureau's affordability standards. And it is imperative for those jobs where there is no client, it's all speculative affordable housing, that we keep costs to a minimum. I mean, just simple economics, it needs to be there. So I often find myself in the position of working with a client who really wants a beautiful, built-in, perhaps fussy, but it's a detail that they own, and it's their home, and it's important. And then later in the afternoon, I'll be working on an ADU of the exact same size for a third of the cost for an affordable housing project. And it really brings home to me that, number one, a lot of homeowners don't view their ADU as a utility or an asset in kind of, like you just said, in sort of a cold way. You know, the same way, you know, affordable housing developers will talk about 1,000 units. There's this tension between it's my home and this is a rental income property. So I really want this very special moment in my house. And then we have to talk to them about durability. Are you turning this into a rental? And how's that really gonna work? And is there outdoor space for this unit? Who owns that? Are they really gonna keep up the garden? How's that gonna work? So there's a certain vision, but finding the practical dimensions of that, and to the cost savings issue, I think practicality has a cost impact. There's also an ongoing cost impact that we need to educate clients about. And one thing that I'm sort of, it's a bug in my mind lately, is the delivery method for projects. You know, in a prior life, I was a project architect on what was then the largest design build contract in the country. And we had hundreds of thousands of dollars moving around. And there was a general contractor, you hired them, they took care of the whole thing, that's great. A lot of ADUs are built using the same model. And I'm not sure that makes sense. I think that with a smaller project, with fewer moving pieces, there are different kinds of opportunities for different kinds of delivery methods. So when I think about the total cost, that's something that I'm really beginning to pick out with some of my clients. Like, do we do CM? Do we do, you know, different kinds of methods?
What do you mean delivery methods?
So, yeah, that's archy lingo. When we talk about delivery methods, we're saying from the moment that you want to start the project, and maybe you meet with an architect, all the way through to, in my mind, after construction is finished and you're involved with the maintenance. What does that look like? At its most basic level, you'll hear about, you know, architect's design, then you hand off to a builder, and the contractor will build it. Some firms do design build, and it's one shop all the way through, but there aren't just two methods there. There are many, many different kinds of methods. So.
To talk about costs a little bit more, I think that the majority of people who hire an architect for their project are not looking for the cheapest solution. I think it's cheaper to have Dweller come and put a unit in your backyard for free and you get some X percentage of revenue. So right off the bat, people are coming to designers for the design process, having that experience, and aren't necessarily looking for the bare bones cheapest thing anyway. So then it's just a matter of how do we deliver a good design that meets their needs and values.
Okay. I saw that on Amazon now you can, not advertising for this company, but as of 3 weeks ago, there's a link on Amazon and you can buy a 320 square foot building code house. You can't get it on Prime. Yeah, like delivery included, it's 15 grand or 20 grand or something. So
Nicholas, our business.
when we talk about why design matters and why you work with an architect at all, I think we need to confront that head on. You know, the flip side of all this talk about modular housing is, what is the role of design, and does it matter, and what do we mean when we say design? So.
And I think that's a good segue into talking a little bit about site design. So oftentimes we might have a client that comes to us asking for an ADU that's going in their backyard, and with that comes a little bit of site context and almost master planning for the entire property. So in your experience, What are some ways you go about that? How often do clients ask for master planning of their entire property? How many clients are even aware that that could be included in your design process? And how important do you think it is in the design of an ADU?
I think that the site plan is probably the most important part of designing an ADU. We've gotten to the point where with the 800 square foot limit and either 1 or 2 bedrooms, there's only so many layouts you can do. So it's really about how do you make that small space live larger, to borrow a theme from this conference. But yeah, it's how do you create outdoor space that's meaningful for both the main house as well as the new unit you're adding to it. And how all of those spaces work together is probably the #1 most impactful decision you're going to make, and you're making it at the very beginning of that process.
Yeah, what I was about to say before I got nervous in front of all of you guys, my face is probably not so pink anymore, was that I think that we often go through a conversation with clients just about that, about master planning and about how to best use their lot. And sometimes we do talk ourselves out of a little bit of work, right, if it's not the right solution. But ultimately trying to figure out what the space is available, what is the potential maximum of that space, what is the highest and best use of that space. And then ultimately, depending upon how they need to know how they're going to use their ADUs, so that you can properly plan for adjacencies, for privacy, for access, for spaces that are private, spaces that are public, conjoined, so forth. And that all comes down to a master planning exercise that I think often is sort of overlooked because it's so exciting to get to the, the sexy, glamorous part of like, here's my ADU and this is what it looks like. And then even then within that space, you have to come up with multi-purpose solutions for everything. Everything must be dual purpose, triple purpose, or more. Everything must sort of be able to be somewhat a little bit more flexible. And if you don't have those items in design, what you have is a garden shed. And I realize that maybe sounds pretentious coming out of my mouth. I'm not being judgmental. I think it's just, if you're trying to create a space that's actually going to reflect the way that you live, like those things just have to be considered. And I think investing in the design process to allow some of those solutions to come out ends up resulting in a better outcome. And the master plan is a huge part of it. And so most of our clients, we have a partner company that kind of is trying to do the modular thing. And honestly, it's the clients that want a custom solution, that want to work with a designer, that want to customize it for their property, are the ones that we have more interaction with and have more calls from.
Yeah, I mean, I think small sites, you're using most of your building coverage. Master planning is super important. I think it kind of highlights this tension between like the modularity and the prefab concepts that seem like they're that are getting pushed in ADUs, and then kind of having things that are site specific that react to these master plans that we do, or just react to the sun and site context and adjacent buildings and trees and things. And so it's we're always kind of grasping towards putting together ADU designs that are like one size fits all, but at the same time every site is totally different. Even if like 50% of old Portland houses are a house with a driveway that goes back to a single car garage, even working within that paradigm, there's so many just variables from site to site. So yes, site planning, and I would love, and the prefab thing I think would be great too, but it's always in conflict with that. So.
Lindsay started touching upon this idea of design offering flexibility, and with Portland, with the Airbnb market gaining popularity, the housing crisis in which we're trying to find more solutions to long-term rentals, in what ways can design offer flexibility for these spaces that can serve not only as short-term rentals, long-term rentals, but also age in place, or granny flats and all the other purposes that ADUs can serve? In what ways can design offer an ADU to a client that is flexible and can almost serve multiple lives with different characteristics throughout the years?
I mean, I feel like it's too easy a question for us, because I feel like ADUs are like, can serve all those functions pretty easily. And kind of like what Lucas was saying, where people get into an ADU design and get so invested in it that, I mean, we've definitely had people that start the process where they're like, this is going to be a long-term rental, and then by the end of it, they're like, actually, we're going to move into it. And so I feel like, I mean, that is the beauty of ADU, is that I don't really know if it really takes that much effort. And I feel like 50%, I mean, we do a lot of actual mother-in-law units, and then I would say like 50% people don't really have a specific plan. It's more kind of just like freedom to them. So,
My comment would be more of a warning a little bit. We did one project for a client who was basically designing it for separate people to rent 2 rooms in the same ADU. So we had separate bedrooms, relatively large bedrooms, separate closets, 2 separate bathrooms. And then because of the restrictive size limits, it was all 1 story. So we were, based on the site size, it was restricted to about 700 square feet. The leftover space that became the living room was basically non-existent. There was space for a kitchen, but no space to like sit down or hang out or have a social gathering. So we push people to think about what are the minimums that they need for those extra spaces. We usually say pressure as much as possible not to have 2 bathrooms, because in 800 square feet, it's a lot of wasted space. And really just keeping the social space as big as possible. So it could be for a small family or for an elderly couple who wants friends over for dinner, rather than pigeonholing that building into just short-term rentals.
Yeah, I would repeat that I think it's really important when you think about flexibility in design to consider the entire site as an organism, right? Do you design an ADU that has all the storage that an ADU might need, or do they get some dedicated storage space in the garage, if there is still a garage? Or do you have 1 laundry room, or do you have shared laundry for everything on the site? I think there's we can't think of an ADU as an ADU, right? If you look at the ecosystem on the site of the main house and the outdoor space and the garage, if it's there, or the basement, what are the opportunities to maximize the synergies between all those pieces? We did recently have the opportunity, which was kind of fun, to design a new single-family residence with an attached ADU. And there's a board on it downstairs. But we were thinking very much about Portland's hot now, but that doesn't last forever. And so what's going to happen? And so this house was designed specifically so that if you punch 1 hole in one place, the main house and the attached ADU become a single house. And there's an easy switch to make something into a master suite. And I could see this building having a longer life, because when it gets tough going, it can turn into something to weather the storm. And then if it needs to, when the market returns, it can become 2 different rentals again, or 2 different units.
So speaking about attached versus detached, maybe we can talk a little bit about what changes in your design approach when dealing with a client that wants an attached versus a detached ADU, maybe issues dealing with structural integrity of the main house, seismic upgrades, or just code-related issues that can influence the design of an attached versus detached ADU?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest issues first with attached versus detached is really thinking about plant circulation and privacy. Is the person in that ADU space, a relative or familiar to your single-family homeowner and owner-occupied unit? Are they not familiar? Is it the same person all the time? Is it a different person depending on the day? And so providing security and privacy under those conditions is really important. And it's a different solution depending upon what the answers to those questions are. And then if you're going to, if it is an attached project and you're dealing with your existing foundation of your home, of course, there's pretty serious seismic and foundation issues you're going to have to look at in order to get that attached to your home. So sometimes there's real prerogatives behind doing a detached ADU as opposed to an attached one. I found with my clients we've done a few that are attached. Most of the ones that I've done, they've chosen to go detached just for cost and for the sort of structural gymnastics of bringing the ADU into the existing home that's already there, if it's a historic home or of an older generation. So for them, the single-family ADU really seems to be the way to go. But ultimately, in all of those situations, we're still dealing with what is the expectation of security, expectation of privacy, and how do we provide the right context for either people to mix or not mix.
I find myself advocating a lot for attached ADUs. I mean, not always, but there are a lot more engineering obstacles that you have to address. But from my perspective, we typically do our own structural engineering on these projects. And I say, it'll cost you another $1,000 for me to figure this out. But at a minimum, one of your walls is now basically an interior wall. So when you start to think about energy efficiency, when you start to think about some of the preserving your yard, some of the ancillary benefits around densifying that development, sometimes it makes a lot of sense. So it's harder as a designer, I would say, to design a sensitive addition to the house where the whole is really greater than the sum of its parts. It's almost easier to do something that's a beautiful jewel in the backyard, but it's sort of risk and reward. When it's done right, I'm a big fan of them.
We've done both, and there's probably two primary reasons why we attach projects to the main house. One is often with aging in place with family members. So if you're building your ADU for an elderly parent, having them direct access to the main house to the ADU is ideal and really probably the best way to live. You have the privacy of having your separate unit, but you can obviously easily get back and forth, particularly if you're older, can't get upstairs, or don't want to go outside if it's icy, or in a wheelchair, etc. The other one is often because of our design regulations. For detached ADUs, you have certain restrictions on what that building can look like and the size it can be. Or if it's attached, you're a little bit more free to design it completely different. Both there's less of a height restriction as well as aesthetic restrictions. So we've gotten into a couple situations where clients had very unique or specific things that they were trying to accomplish with that ADU, and we used attaching it to the main house as a way to get around the restrictions in the zoning code.
I mean, we typically kind of advocate for detached, actually, and I think part of that is just when, if you have multiple uses on a site, a lot of the times having a detached gives each user a better sense of kind of ownership of the site, and I think also from a property value and just kind of curb appeal standpoint, we feel like the detached has adds more value, and then I think same with I think the aging in place thing is an important thing, and how the ADU is functioning, and if it's really a separate thing or just kind of functioning as a suite really off of the house. But I think there is always the danger with the attached of once you touch that house, it's kind of like the thread that unravels a sweater, and it's like, where do you stop once you touch the asbestos tile siding? Then you're do you tear the whole thing off? And so with detached, it just kind of it makes the ADU more of a known quantity for contractors and things. So.
Well, the terminology age in place has been thrown around a little bit, so let's talk about how the design process or the design elements that clients maybe should consider that they wouldn't otherwise when designing for an age in place type of ADU, whether it be construction, materiality, low threshold showers. What are some elements that you have found that are really important, and especially ones that clients tend to overlook?
I mean, I think the biggest thing with age in place that we found is just with ADUs, footprint and yard space is always at a real premium, and so there's always the desire to go to a two-story structure. And so I think the biggest thing with age in place is just to provide the possibility for full living function on a single level, which is not always easy, because you're kind of if you're going to have a kitchen and a living space and a bathroom and a bedroom, you're kind of at like 400 or 500 square feet. And so, and a lot of the times that's too big for a lot of sites. And so I mean, there's certainly other grab bars and low threshold things that are factors, but I think that's the biggest thing, to have whether it's a dedicated bedroom on the ground floor or the potential to be able to carve off a space. That's the biggest thing we see.
We've done a lot of single-story ADUs, primarily for mostly people designing them for parents or for them to move into as they rent out their main house. The biggest thing is we try to do a slab on grade, barrier-free circulation, no stairs up into the space. Thinking about kind of the design of how sliding doors or front doors don't have big thresholds that you can't get over if you're in a wheelchair, et cetera. But primarily it's creating that ground floor surface that is as easy as possible to get in and out of.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed to admit the only time I've done an ADU that was specifically for an aging woman who she's very clear, she's like, I'm going to die here. And she has limited mobility, she's got a nervous system disorder, and she hired me, but she came equipped with so much research. She was thinking about things like knobs on her kitchen cabinets. She wanted those to be solid wood, and you core it out with a hole so that you can open it without having to grasp something. She was thinking about how she operates her windows, because she doesn't want to have to get up and pull something to adjust the blinds, because she can't grab something like that and twist the blinds. So we thought about window coverings in a different way. Yeah, she is just a remarkable person, but she kind of brought it all to the table.
Made your job easy.
Yeah, I mean, I made it flat for her, and I gave her the clearances she needed, but she really did a great job on that project.
Lindsay, you have something to add?
Yeah. One thing I think sometimes gets overlooked for aging in place often is garage space. It's not part of the ADU math often, and where I live in snow country, for people that are aging in place, being able to park inside of a garage actually is pretty important. And having a clear walkway into the home and having it be free of ice and other barriers is really critical. So that becomes very challenging from a site planning standpoint of maybe the house already has a 2-car garage. Where does this person park their car? What does the family have to sacrifice in order to make that happen? How do you get someone from inside whatever that dry car space is into the unit, and what does that adjacency look like? So when you think about it, an indoor garage space is equivalent to the ADU. It's a pretty opulent thing to have in a relative aspect, but it's very needed in a lot of climates. So where I come from, I think the garage piece is something that people aren't thinking about, and then they get into it and they're like, oh my gosh, where am I going to park my car? And that's a reality of where we live.
I would say I have clients that come to me and say, I want it to be all ADA, all universal design. And then when they see how big an ADA bathroom is, they're like, well, let's talk about degrees of accessibility, which is a better conversation to have anyway, right? It's sort of understanding their needs and what they think. And again, there was an early question about how you use design to give your client everything they want. Sometimes you have to take the long view. And so I've had a conversation with a lot of clients like, we can do this now. If you need a wheelchair at some point, here's an easy way to move this door, and now it makes a lot of sense. And then we design it structurally so that can easily happen. So yeah, it's sort of future-proofing the building a little bit. Sometimes you can't do it all at once.
And I would add that a universal access bathroom can be a beautiful modern bathroom, right? And I think things that people don't realize is when they actually see it finished, that you can be in this bathroom or in this kitchen space and it doesn't sort of scream at you that it's an accessible space. It is just a beautiful, clean, hanging vanity, low threshold for all your doorways, and it's open. And the impression is not that this is an accessible or universal access space. It's just a really beautiful modern space. And so that's usually it's the size that we have to give up a little bit of space on. That can seem really huge. But ultimately, I mean, so more of my clients, I do have one set of clients right now where they're calling this house the last house. And it's a weird, morbid thing to be talking about with your clients, but it's a reality of life. And they're in their 50s. They've got a long way to go. They're still skiing down the mountain every day, but they're having this long view. And so for their use now, it's just this beautiful modern bathroom. But in the future, it's going to allow them to access that bathroom for the rest of their lives.
Okay, I've got one more question for the panel before I open it up to questions from the audience. So audience, start thinking about what you'd like to ask them. So let's close this with the question of, if you could offer advice to a future ADU client as the designer, what would it be? I'm sure there's plenty of things we would like to recommend off the bat.
All right. I think one of the first things that we usually ask of our clients anyway is to find images of places, spaces that you like the feel of, you like the look of. So when we're starting to design, we know what you like. So I would say when you come, if you're planning on hiring an architect, come to the table with that stuff already done. Think about what spaces you've visited yourself around the world that have a good feeling to them. They're proportioned correctly, or you like the materials of it, or whatever it is. And bring that to help start the conversation, rather than us sitting down with completely nowhere to start from.
I would say that it's okay to be scared, and that I would add, in several cases, I've gotten involved with families. Maybe the children own a house and they're building an ADU for, in one case it's so dad can move in. And I had a lot of offline conversations with dad, who of course is a former architect, so that constellation of issues. Talked with the son, who had some issues. I know the wife. Talked with her, she had a third set of issues. And an ADU is your home. And especially if you're bringing in a family member, that is going to be fraught with issues. And so I think one of the most important conversations I've had with clients in that situation is sort of it's a running therapy thing, which is beautiful. I'm probably not qualified to do that, but what's nice is by the end, you have a new widget on your property, but there have been a lot of really great conversations and reflections and connections about moving forward in life together. So I would say if family is involved, just be prepared, talk with your architect about that reality. I have a lot of colleagues who get drawn into family drama and aren't prepared for it, and that's even harder when you're on the outside sometimes. So I think that's part of why we all do what we do also. That's really rewarding.
I would say any architect that works in residential has a certain piece of counseling on their plate. It's part of the process. And not that the architects are counseling the people, but that the architects need to have their listening ears on and be ready to take in the verbal and nonverbal cues that are telling them what their needs and what the job is and what the needs are. And so my advice to anyone wanting to build an ADU is to not overlook the process. And just because it's a small space doesn't make it super, super easy. It actually can be complex, and that the outcome is greater if you invest in the process of design. And if you give yourself and your design team and your family and whoever else are your stakeholders time to engage in the process, because that's what gives everybody that has a stake in it feelings of ownership in the end project.
That was a very tactful advertisement for hiring an architect. And I think that's extremely self-serving, but I do feel like having the hirings, I think it's hard for people to justify paying, if your contractor is like, yeah, I can do the designs for you for $3,000 versus an architect that says, it's going to cost $8,000 to $12,000. It's a hard thing for clients to quantify that and to really be like, well, that's a lot of money. What am I really getting? And I think having faith in design professionals that we do bring something other than just fancy aesthetics, which I truly believe. But I think also kind of going back to I think the very first question that we talked about was the kind of having that conversation about kind of reducing changing your lifestyle towards an ADU thing, and kind of really looking at just your habits and lifestyle and trying to, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in all of our lives that we could do to reduce our impact and to make ourselves, be able to live in a smaller space, and just try to do as many of those first before, I think sometimes architecture is seen as kind of a solution to problems, but trying to get to the root of what the issues are at the beginning. But anyway.
And with that, do we have any questions from the audience? Ooh, a ton. I saw your hand first.
This might be a summary question, but what would you say the top design principles are? What are the top design principles for building small?
In what category?
I think Lindsay had a great point earlier about making sure that everything is doing 2 or 3 or more jobs. And that applies to all scales of thinking.
Yeah, I think it comes down to efficiency. So it's an efficiency of spaces, it's efficiency of systems, sustainability, utilizing passive solar strategies, things like that to reduce kind of the heating and cooling you might have to put in that space, finding rooms. We usually have like a great room, quote unquote, where it's kitchen, living, dining, kind of combined into one cohesive space. It's really trying to maximize the efficiencies of that small unit.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So, in the city of Portland or outside the city of Portland, or Multnomah County, if you build an attached ADU, how do you know if that's not just a home remodel or if it's an ADU? And if it's, where does that 800 square foot restriction come in if it's an attached ADU?
So you measure the 800 square feet from the inside face of the exterior walls. So you don't actually count the exterior walls. And any space that is outside of that is also accessible to the main house would not be considered part of that, 800 square feet. To classify it as an ADU, you have a kitchen. So if it's
Separate entrance.
right. So if you build an addition and it doesn't have a kitchen in it and it's just a bedroom and like bathroom suite for grandma, technically it's just an addition to the house and not a full ADU. We have done a couple projects where we've had an attached ADU and we actually attach it with a vestibule. So the vestibule is accessed from both the main house as well as the ADU. And that space does not count towards the square footage of the ADU. So we could actually get, like we used it as a mudroom, so you can come in, take off your shoes and coats, hang it up, and then enter the ADU after that. So you get a little bit of bonus space there.
Question? Yes.
What kind of heating system, cooling system is typically used in this small space? Like,
Usually an electric mini-split system is what we see, 80% of the time. I think radiant, like a hydronic radiant in the slab is, we do occasionally, and then sometimes just electric heat, but that's pretty rare. I think mini-splits are usually what we end up with.
Yes.
Since you've done this many times, do you have a favorite construction method or a product or a material that you like to promote or use in your designs that's affordable and sustainable?
I guess I'll make a pitch for like rigid insulation on the outside of a building. That's where you can even go down, typically in this climate we do 2x6 construction. But you can go to 2x4 construction and then put some of that insulation on the outside of the building between the plywood and the cladding, and so that every stud is a thermal bridge, and so that covers all of those. And so window details are a little different, but it's not a product. Although like Roxol, like mineral wool, is a great non-toxic, non-petroleum based product that is great for that.
And I would add that for tiny homes and small homes especially, I try to always steer my clients away from foam insulation on the inside of their structure.
What?
It's a long answer that I don't have time to give, but
Closed or open cell? Or
both. And ultimately it's about just trying to remove toxicity from the inside of the structure. You have a much smaller space, higher concentrations within the quality of your air inside. If you've got children in the space, they're exposed to the same levels of that toxicity, and they're about a third of my size. So all these things start to extrapolate, and I've got peers across the country right now that are developing modular units and prefab units, and they are full of foam. And the exterior exhalation that Skylar's talking about is a different condition. But if you're inside a well sealed thermal envelope and you're covered in foam on the inside, I do not advise that situation.
Okay, yeah.
I wonder if the panelists could comment on what's the typical number of hours they spend on an ADU?
Good question.
Design.
Just design, not including construction documents? Just design, not including putting together a permit package, or the whole process? How many hours does a design team spend on an ADU?
I mean, I would say rough average is, we would say maybe around 100 hours to get through permitting. That wouldn't include construction administration and being on site at different times, but to get a permit, I would say that would be a good rough estimate.
Everybody concur?
Yeah, I'm usually, like if I meet a client and they know what they're doing and it's a very smooth process, that's 40 to 50 hours, honestly. If it gets into family matters and other things.
Which is usually the case.
Iterations and iterations and iterations.
Right, that's somebody who is sophisticated, kind of knows what they want to do. They're looking for someone to help advise them on the best way to get it done. That's kind of what I budget.
And we would say, so 100 hours is also would be spread out over 3 or 4 months. So it's obviously not straight, because we hand a drawing set to you and you talk with your family and make decisions, then come back for a meeting. So we usually tell people it'll be 3 to 4 months of design process. You know, at the end of the day, it's around 100 hours of our work.
How about a question in the back? Yes, you.
The standard seems to be naturally about 800 square feet for an ADU, and a lot of us have those locked down in our code, so you can't go over 800. First question is, do you feel that that's a good number for people to live efficiently and affordably in an 800 square foot detached unit? And then if you're morphing a house, so you're running into problems with 800 square feet. Lindsay and Louis and I talked about this. We're running into that in our town, and a couple wants to morph the house that the mother can keep her there and then there. And it's 902 square feet, they can't do it. So is there a better inside, outside, or is one standard fit all? Should be 1,000 for inside? I heard Seattle, there's 1,000 is max. If you guys just comment, what's a good efficient number for us?
Just to repeat the question really quick so everybody hears it, the question was, is 800 square feet an efficient size for an ADU? Should that be extended to 1,000 square feet? What seems to be a good size for a family to live in?
I mean, I think that we found that 800 square feet is pretty great for, you know, a 2-bedroom, 1.5, potentially 2-bathroom. In Portland, at least, that's 800 square feet of living area. So depending on if it's a 1-story or 2, it's really more like 900 plus gross square foot. And I think in situations like that, I mean, in Portland, I think you would be recommended to just get a zoning adjustment, and you would probably be granted that. 800 seems fine to me.
I'm okay with the 800 restriction for a new structure. I'd say that most people in the rest of the world live in that or less. We tend to have large houses here. The one caveat there, and we spoke about this a bit earlier, but I think that for internal ADUs, if you're renovating a garage that's existing or a basement that's existing or dividing a house into 2 units, I don't see why we should limit the square footage. If you have a 900 square foot basement, who cares if you're building a 900 square foot ADU? I also am a firm believer that we shouldn't be dictating unit counts and sizes within an existing house structure anyway. So I would say that if you are writing a code for your town, yeah, maybe limit it for a detached new structure or even an addition. But if it's an internal renovation, make it much more flexible.
Yeah, I would say 800 square feet is huge. really, that's a 2 or 3 bedroom house in a lot of parts of the city. You also, there's been one client that had a basement larger than 800 square feet. And all we did was install beams to 6 foot 11 3/4 inches above the floor at 48 inches on center. And all of a sudden under the code, that can't be living space anymore. So they got all that space and it didn't count against the 800 square feet. So there's always a way to game it. But 800 square feet is plenty of room.
Yes, you.
So I had a question about placemaking. So what we're all talking about here in terms of architecture and design is we're doing infill design, we're adding more people in tighter places in different parts of the city. And we're talking about how we make those places livable and healthy places for people, fundamentally. And we're talking about we're thinking about what is unique about Portland, that, you fill and add and double our density, whatever you want to do in Portland versus other places on the West Coast, other places in Canada, other parts. What is your thinking about that in terms of what you might be doing differently? And like if you live in, I'll cite a specific example just as a help. Like if you're in North Portland, certain overlook areas where you're closer to the sky, the light qualities are different, the patterns in the neighborhood. I don't mean historic wise, I don't mean in that sense. Versus if you were much lower in Labs Addition, where you're closer in, you don't have the same reference to the city, to downtown, to the rivers, the topography is different. So there's these qualitative, experiential differences that as you do infill, and we can talk functionally, occupationally, pragmatically about all this stuff and everything you've said, but there are we live in a temperate climate, we could build porches, 800 could feel like 1,200 square feet, depending on how you site design and infill. That what are those qualities that we really want to retain in our city, in our neighborhoods, as we add this density, that it's not an either or thing, but that we're stitching the city together in this kind of additive, incremental kind of approach that we don't want to lose sight of. Because, where we are losing a little bit of sight of on some of these larger multifamily projects where some are better than others, but we're possibly, or we could lose sight of what makes this Northwest region qualitative and unique and what would be different about it in 20 years and other places as well.
I would say, I think we all love to hear some of the things that you just said, right? Because it speaks to the heart of why every site is different. And I think we're all sensitive to that. Sometimes I hear this conversation and it's like Portland in the good old days, or what are we trying to keep, or what are we trying to change? And
it's not that.
That's not
I worked
it.
on probably 10 AD projects.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to do that.
No, I
It's
think
how we move forward together.
it's exactly, it's how we move forward and what do we preserve. And I think that's kind of all of our life works in a sense. That's a hard one to answer in 30 seconds.
And I think ADUs are a good way. I think that neighborhoods are more vibrant when there's more people there, particularly more diverse people. So older people, younger people, people of all different ethnicities and backgrounds. So I think ADUs give that opportunity. They're providing a housing type that could be relatively affordable compared to some of the new infill McMansions. So I think just as a project type unto itself, it is helping address some of those issues. I think there's other kind of, obviously every site is different and there's unique situations. So if there's an alleyway, like utilizing the alleyway as a way to access the ADU and kind of create pedestrian flow through the middle of a block, I think is a really intriguing concept that might change depending on what neighborhood you're building in. So that would be like my first thing, is just the project type itself is allowing us to preserve existing housing stock, provide new, more affordable housing for a more diverse group of people to call Portland home.
And with that, I'm going to have to cut us short. If you guys want to ask the panel further questions, you're welcome to approach them in the 15 minutes we have before the next panel begins. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for your questions.